What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G and the TCL Stylus 5G. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and in case you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G, we're getting a 6.52-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 269, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a really large 6.81-inch IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 395, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. So on one hand, while for more basic activities, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G doesn't really have a bad display. If you're really going to be on your phone a lot, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be better for several different reasons. First of all, at 6.81 inches versus 6.52, as you can clearly see, the TCL Stylus 5G is much larger. So when you're doing things like reading, for example, things are going to be a bit easier to see. In addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 20:9, the form factor with the TCL Stylus 5G is slightly taller and more narrow. So if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching videos, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're browsing the web, reading, using social media, stuff like that, with a taller form factor like this, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Then of course, when it comes to image quality, the TCL Stylus 5G is pretty much better in every way. The colors and brightness look a lot better. And as you can see from the viewing angles, the TCL Stylus 5G does have a bit of an advantage. So if you're maybe outside in the sun or really in any kind of bright area, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a bit easier to see. And of course, with a 1080p resolution versus only 720p with the Revvl 6, the Stylus 5G has a much sharper image. So if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where the image quality really matters, with a higher resolution, you will of course get a much better experience. So again, the bottom line here is, if you're really not going to be on your phone a lot and you just need an acceptable display that works, then sure, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is not going to be really that bad. But if you're really going to be consuming all kinds of content, especially stuff like videos and games, where the image quality matters a bit more, you are going to be better off with the TCL Stylus 5G. Now for storage, with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. So clearly here, the TCL Stylus 5G has a pretty big advantage, having double the storage of the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G. So if storage is important to you, then definitely keep this in mind. That being said though, with 64GB, while in my opinion it's not really ideal, for the average user, I would say as long as you're not constantly downloading stuff like apps, especially games that take up a bit more space, you make sure to use a microSD card whenever you can, and you're just generally mindful of what you're putting on your phone. Really, in that case, 64GB is at least going to be acceptable. But if you're more of a power user, or if you just don't want to ever have to worry about storage, then the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a much better choice. For security features, both phones do have face unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys. So definitely a great spot for a fingerprint scanner. But starting with the Revvl 6, let's go ahead and give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the TCL Stylus 5G. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, both phones do have face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setups here, with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G, we got a 5-megapixel front-facing camera, kind of a water drop notch design. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 13-megapixel main camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 2K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we get a real nice looking hole punch design for the front-facing camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50-megapixel main camera, a 5-megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera. And then for video, the TCL Stylus 5G has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. So as far as features go, both phones do have pretty decent camera setups, but in almost every way, the TCL Stylus 5G does have an advantage. First of all, when it comes to the actual features, again, the TCL Stylus 5G does have an ultra-wide camera, whereas with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G, while we are getting a macro camera with this phone, unfortunately there is no ultra-wide camera. So if that is a feature you want, definitely keep this in mind. In addition to this, I would say in general, with the TCL Stylus 5G, the photo quality is going to be much better here. So overall, I would say if you're taking a lot of photos, you are most likely going to want to go with the TCL Stylus 5G. That being said though, the quality we get with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G isn't really terrible, and if you're just using the camera every now and then it is probably at least going to get the job done. In addition to this, again, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G can't actually record 2K videos, and while in my opinion it's not really that big of an advantage, it still is technically a resolution better than 1080p, so if you do do want to be able to record 2K videos, then this is something to keep in mind. But again, in general, I would say overall, if you do want the better camera setup between the two, I would definitely go with the TCL Stylus 5G. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, believe it or not, these phones are actually pretty much the same. Both phones here are getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. So when it comes to performance, you're not really going to see a huge difference between the two. That being said though, in my experience, for most activities, especially the more basic things like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, these phones are going to be perfectly fine for that kind of thing. And unless you're going to be on your phone all day, or maybe you're doing more demanding activities, they're not going to feel slow either. Now, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, and here are the results I got. So as you can see here, the TCL Stylus 5G did technically score a little bit higher, but again, in my experience, neither phone here is really going to be that much faster than the other. So I honestly wouldn't use performance as a deciding factor here. But again, for more basic daily activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music and stuff like that, either phone is going to be perfectly fine. And for the average user, I would say you will get a pretty good experience. Now, when it comes to the battery, with the T-Mobile Revvl 6, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that supports 15W fast charging, and with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18W fast charging. So both phones are going to get pretty good battery life, but if you want the best between the two, then of course, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G will have an advantage. And when it comes to charging speeds, while neither phone really has the best fast charging you can get, in my experience, both phones do charge pretty fast, so you won't have to worry about that either. When it comes to software, both phones do have Android 12, and while I'm not really sure if either phone is going to get Android 13 in the future, at least we are getting Android 12 and not Android 11. So if you're not too concerned about the software, but you want something at least decently newer, then you won't go wrong with these phones. As far as other features go, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we are actually getting NFC, whereas unfortunately we're not with the T-Mobile Revvl 6. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, then the TCL Stylus 5G will have an advantage. In addition to this, of course, as the name suggests, the Stylus 5G does in fact have a stylus, whereas of course the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G doesn't. So if you do want a stylus, then obviously the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a better choice. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in pretty much every area where there's a difference, the TCL Stylus 5G is definitely a much better device. The display is much better, being quite a bit larger, with a better form factor, and better image quality. So if you're consuming a lot of content, this is definitely an important benefit. The TCL Stylus 5G again also has double the storage, a camera setup that not only has more features, but also takes better photos, and it also has NFC and a stylus. That being said though, on the other hand, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G really isn't a bad phone for what it is. And again, this phone does have a slightly larger battery, so if battery life is more important to you, then this is a consideration. And in general, while the TCL Stylus 5G is technically better, if you're really just doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, you're not really going to be on your phone a lot, so you don't really need a super nice display or anything, and you really just need a solid entry-level 5G phone that works, then again, while the TCL Stylus 5G is still technically the better phone here, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is honestly going to work just fine too. But this concludes my comparison between the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G and the TCL Stylus 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kleepus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.